I'd like to thank everybody for coming inside for our next presentation. My name is Michael Torres. I'm a class of 1986 celebrating my 25th reunion this weekend. One of the things I'm just really proud to be here. Actually, I'm a Cal class of 82 out of architecture as well, and serve in a number of capacities at the university, not only as an alumnus, but serve on the board of trustees for the Berkeley Endowment and also on the athletic advisory board. So I have a number of capacities, a number of connections to the university. I certainly encourage those of you that are not involved to get into the university, get involved with the university. Also, one of the things that I do, which I highly encourage people to think about, is in January I actually have a breakfast for about 10 Haas MBAs in my office in downtown Oakland, and it's to get the students actually off campus and into the workplace to really understand what goes on in businesses, some of the challenges we're thinking about, but also to understand what they're thinking about. And it's an active dialogue, and so I share that with you as kind of something to take home. Also, one of the things that Nancy, my wife, and I have been doing for the last 10 years is actually sponsoring a number of students. And this last Tuesday, Tenny and I hosted 4 of those students in my office for a networking event as well, to get to know them, ourselves, but also to encourage the students to get to, to know each other. So there are different things that you can do, but I think it strengthens the bonds beyond just one weekend to make them really lifetime relationships. So I'd like to leave that with you. It's my pleasure this afternoon to introduce a true gem of Haas, someone that certainly influenced me when I was here as a student, David Aaker. David is the Vice Chairman of Profit, a strategic brand marketing consulting, and Professor Emeritus in Marketing Strategy at the Haas School. He's the creator of the Aaker model and has published more than 100 articles and 15 books, including his latest, Brand Relevance and Making Competitors Irrelevant. I personally am really looking forward to this. He's also been featured in a chapter of Conversation with Marketing Masters, a collection of insights from some of the world's most influential marketing gurus. He's been awarded best articles by the Journal of Marketing and California Management Review, received his PhD and MA from Stanford and a BS from MIT, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to David Aaker.
It's nice to be here. When I was walking up, there was 2 young kids that asked me to take their picture, and it turns out they had just been admitted to the Haas School, and they were so excited. You know, we really have got a great school here, and we've got an incredible dean, Rich Lyons. I think he's, without question, the best dean in any business school in the world. And we have incredible staff like Tenny and a wonderful faculty. So there's just so much going for it, and I'm certainly proud to have been associated with Haas over the years. I want to talk about brand relevance today. It's really it's a subject that I've been really interested in for almost 10 years. I had a chapter in it in my last brand book, which is called Brand Portfolio Strategy, and then I've since expanded that to this more recent book, Brand Relevance, Making Competitors Irrelevant. And I've studied just a lot of markets and a lot of brands and so forth, and I continually amazed how how important brand relevance is, or how powerful it is. And just a couple of observations out of all these studies. First of all, every market is dynamic. There's new applications, there's new categories emerging, there's new competitors, and new customers, there's trends. And if you try to understand that, it's often bewildering. And brand relevance really kind of holds a key because it explains market dynamics because it drives market dynamics. That's really what is really affecting how the market structure changes in market after market. Second observation is that it's really important that you understand the different kinds of innovation, because it's not only enough to innovate, you have to also spend some time doing something besides incremental innovation, which is where most of the dollars go. And the third thing is the astounding fact is that most marketing expenditures, most brand building expenditures don't do anything. They have no impact. They have none. And the reason behind that is that most brands and most market positions are very stable over time. There's just so much inertia in the marketplace. And you look at category after category after category, and you'll see brands that don't change market share. It doesn't matter what people do. So let me give you an example. I studied the Japanese beer market for over 40 years. And in the first 15 of these years, you could almost say the first 25, Kirin had 60% share, plus or minus 1%. 60% for 15 to 25 years. And the other competitors, the other three competitors, were spending enormous money on, they were introducing 3 new products a year on average, each competitor. They were spending enormous money on marketing. Nothing. Until in 1986, Asahi came out with Super Dry, a new subcategory of beer. It was higher alcohol, less aftertaste, and more important, it was positioned at the young user because the Kirin Lager was for your father's beer, for the beer drinker's beer, and so on. Asahi was after a entirely different market. They were, and they had a different can. The can was Western. And in 1 year, 18 months, they took 10% share away from Kirin. After 15 years of nothing, they took 10% share in just over a year. So Kirin was, as you can imagine, they were really pissed off. And so they did everything. I mean, they came out with Kirin Dry, they did this and they did that, and nothing worked. They were in free fall. Until in 1990, they came out with another subcategory of their own called Ichiban. And that was a beer with a different taste and from lager and so on. And that stabilized their share. And they stopped declining. And then about 4 or 5 years later, there was a repositioning of dry beer and a repositioning of lager beer that started the free fall all over again. And that went on until about 2000, when Kirin took over a leadership position in a new beer called Hapashu, which is a low-malt, low-tax beer. And just think, Asahi passed Kirin in market share. Think of Coors passing Budweiser. It was an incredible story. But if you look at these 45, 50 years of data, market share trajectory changed only 4 times. And 3 times there was a new subcategory formed, and the 4th 2 subcategories were simultaneously repositioned. If you look at you take any category, look at the computer industry, and you look at how the market structure changed, it's always because of new categories. It's not because somebody was better at marketing. So when DEC became the number 2 manufacturer of computers in the mid-'70s with a mini computer, not because they had better advertising than IBM, they came out with a new category. And then the Sun was the fastest growing company in the history of U.S. in the late 80s, and they had a new subcategory. and that was network workstations and servers. And then we had graphic workstations, and we had Dell's built-to-order PCs, which led to a company that's now got around $57 billion of sales. But every time there was a real meaningful change in the marketplace, it was because of a new subcategory that was created. Well, let me just back up and talk about what exactly I mean by brand relevance. If you look at how a decision is made by a customer, they first select a product category to buy. So it might be an SUV. And then they decide what brands to consider. It might be Lexus, BMW, and Cadillac. And then they make a decision. It might be a BMW. The first two stages are brand relevance. The third stage is brand preference. And we spend way, way, way too much time on brand preference competition and way too little on brand relevance. Now, the distinctive thing about this model is that the selection of the category or subcategory is now in play. It's not assumed away. It's in play. So the whole challenge is to get people to select the category you're making and others are not. Now, the routes to winning are completely different. Brand preference competition, you win because your brand is preferred. That's how you win. And the strategy is to be really good at marketing, to convince people that my brand is better than your brand, and to engage in incremental innovation. You know, better, faster, cheaper, relentlessly. Always getting a little bit better from year to year. That's the way you win. But the problem is that there's so much market momentum in terms of brands, and competitors copy you. And they either duplicate what you're doing or they give the impression that they are. In either case, you have a short-term advantage. Brand relevance competition is completely different. You win because the other brands are not considered. Not because they're not preferred, they're not considered. That's how you win. So the whole goal of competition is to create a subcategory that's defined by some kind of must-haves. Customer must have something or other that your competitors don't have, and so they're not considered. That's how you compete. And so you have to do that by getting beyond incremental innovation to engage in substantial or transformational innovation. You know, it's Econ 101. You know, when you have a monopoly, life is good. So when I'm talking about a category or subcategory, I'm talking about something that have a must-have characteristics. So Prius has a hybrid engine. That becomes for some a must-have. They want to buy something with a hybrid engine. But it can also be defined by going beyond functional benefits. So a Prius is also defined by a distinct design and a distinct brand. So when you're driving a Prius, you get, at least a segment does, a substantial self-expressive benefits. In addition to functional benefits, you get self-expressive benefits. And so that can be part of the subcategory. And it's all kind of comes back to innovation. You know, Hawes School is leading through innovation. This is the innovation school, and this is the innovation area of the world. But you really have to understand innovation. There's three kinds of innovation. One is incremental innovation. So that means you're kind of doing what you did before, but a little bit better. Then there's substantial innovation, and then that means you're doing what you did before, but you're doing it so much better that the improvement is a must-have. So body armor with DuPont Kelver, well, body armor is the same stuff, but now the Kelver is so much better, it becomes a must-have. And then there's transformational innovation, a real game changer like Salesforce.com is a pioneer in cloud computing. That would be a complete game changer. Now, if you have a game changer, it's pretty easy to understand the strategy. You've got an opportunity to have a new category or subcategory, and you're going to manage it appropriately. But the tough thing is the difference between incremental and substantial. That's really the tough decision. And this, Danny Moore earlier today talked about the what I call is the rosy picture bias. And that's where companies, especially in the high-tech world, think an incremental innovation is a substantial innovation that'll define a new subcategory that'll be a must-have. So that's really a tough one. But the other side of the coin is, if you have a substantial innovation and you think you manage it like it's an incremental innovation, you've lost a huge, huge opportunity. And that lost opportunity usually isn't very visible. It's not like you did something and failed and lost time and money. It's just not visible. And so that's really insidious. So that's really the trick to this whole thing. You know, it's one of the really important issues, deciding between whether an innovation is incremental or substantial. So we make this test. One, can we deliver? Can our organization actually deliver on this new value proposition? And second, is there a must-have? And again, that's the distinction between incremental and substantial innovation. Is the business worthwhile? Or are we talking about such a small segment that it just doesn't matter? And does it have legs? We need to have something that will give us something over the long term, not just in a few months. The payoff from this is really incredible. First of all, I can give you literally hundreds of anecdotes there. Most of them are in my book, and that is, like Enterprise Rent-A-Car. They started this idea that instead of being at the airport, we'll be in town. So if you have an accident, you can get a car. We'll actually deliver it to you. They went something like 35 years with no competition. 35 years, no competition. None. They passed Hertz. And even 5 years after that, they still didn't have any competition. They now are, I think, twice the size of Hertz. Their profits are much more than 2 times Hertz. And finally, Hertz and Avis are struggling. Maybe we can compete. But they went a long, long time. And I could give you anecdote after anecdote like that. But we also have dozens of financial studies that support the proposition that the only way to generate real growth and substantial financial success is to create new categories and subcategories. So here's a study of 108 business launches. Those that created new categories and subcategories out of those 108 were 14% of the sample, 38% of the revenue, and 61% of the profits. A McKinsey study, 1,000 firms, 40 years, new entrants. They looked at new entrants, and they found that the profit premium for new entrants over the average for the industry was 13% in the first year and even 1% 10 years later. And you got to believe that on the average, new entrants are more likely to have new categories and subcategories than existing entrants. If we have one empirical fact in all of marketing, supported by dozens of studies over decades of research, it is that new products' success is correlated with differentiation. Me-too products just don't, on average, do very well. And that has been proved again and again and again. So again, if you believe that how different a new product is correlated with the fact it's probably introducing a new subcategory, that's more evidence. So I'm looking at all this thinking and research and case studies I've done, and I tried to pick out a few observations about how do you do this. And first of all, it starts with an idea. And, ideas come from all over. You can ask customers, but usually very small incidents of these come from asking customers. But observing customers is more powerful. Like Marriott sent a team of people and lived in their lobbies for 6 weeks, and they kind of reinvented the lobby to provide a different experience for the business user of the lobby. You can be a customer. Quicken started when this founder's wife had trouble paying bills online. Actually, a lot of new ideas come from things that are existing in the marketplace, but they're not working very well. So it's not as if the inventor of a new subcategory had the vision. It's just that he was able to make such a dramatic improvement over what was there and struggling. Zappos started because somebody realizes that, it's a little frustrating. I can't get the size and the design I want by going in a shoe store because they don't have enough inventory. So we'll do an online store. Underserved segments, Power Bar developed the energy bar category, and somebody realized that, we could use an energy bar for women. And Luna was developed. Technology, Dreyer's has the slow churn ice cream that generates creamy ice cream that has much less fat. Now, it doesn't take a lot of customer insight to know this is a good idea. The problem is to do it, right? To develop the technology and the production ability to do it. Design can be a must-have. I mean, Jaguar has had its own little subcategory for a long time, and a lot of the vodkas are getting by on design alone because they certainly don't have anything in the bottle. A system solution, Siebel packaged a bunch of component software and called it CRM in about 1995 and created a whole new subcategory in which the people that made those components were completely irrelevant. Microsoft did the same thing with Office. You could augment the product as Best Buy did with the Geek Squad. And they provided an extra service that a lot of customers regard as a must-have because they don't want to fight computers and the entertainment system. Second observation is timing is everything. I have a blog now. I started a blog about 3.5 months ago. It's a whole new world, this blogs. And I twittered for 9 months, and now I blog. But it's a way to communicate your ideas. Books take a couple years. An article takes 3 months. You can write a blog in an hour. So it's really handy. But I wrote a blog post on my blog, davidacker.com, about Apple's secret weapon. And everybody thinks that Jobs has this great vision. Now, it's true that Jobs got a lot going for him. I mean, he's one of the most remarkable CEOs of our time. He's got a design flair. He's really close to the technology. He understands competitive out there. Incidentally, Jobs is famous for saying he would never ask a customer. Never does market research. But if you look at his most successful product ever, the iPod, the most successful consumer electronics product probably ever, 2 years before the iPod came out, Sony came out with not one but 2 iPod-like products. The Memory Stick Walkman and the Vio Music Clip. So, Sony has an incredible silo problem. I wrote a book called Spanning Silos, which I try to analyze the silo problems of organizations like Sony, and so that was one problem. They have the Walkman silo and the Vio silo and the music silo was inhibiting both of them. But one of the main reason those things failed is timing. The technology wasn't ready. They could only put 16 songs or something. It was overpriced. And 2 years later, Jobs could see the technology was coming together. You know, the iPad. Bill Gates introduced the iPad 10 years before Apple. 10 years. He called it the tablet PC. The timing wasn't right. It wasn't ready. And look at the iPhone. The iPhone was, the technology for the iPhone was put in place in Europe like 10 years before. There's a company called Vivendi and a person called Messner, who later went to jail for overhyping his ideas. But he got the European people to spend $500 billion on the 3G technology so he could have an iPhone-like product 10 years before iPhone. The timing wasn't right. The company has to be ready, the market has to be ready, and the technology has to be ready. In 1978, Lee Iacocca and this brilliant designer he had, Sperry or something like that. Anyway, they were at Ford, and they proposed the minivan. And at that time, Ford didn't have a front-wheel drive car. And Ford had a huge station wagon business. They didn't want to kill the station wagon business. So Henry Ford said no. 2 years later, they were both fired by Henry Ford, and they merged at Chrysler, which was then in bankruptcy. That was with a famous government bailout of first government bailout of Chrysler. And they had a front-wheel drive, coincidentally. Happily, they had a crummy station wagon business. There's nothing to lose. And they had a CEO that believed in this idea, namely Lee Iacocca. It was his idea. So they put a ton of money, despite their financial situation. And incidentally, it's really an advantage sometimes to have a marketing CEO instead of a finance CEO. If Roger Smith, then the CEO ultimate at General Motors, had been the CEO of Chrysler, they would have just fired people, closed plants, and so on. But Lee Iacocca invested in the minivan. The minivan sold 200,000 cars the first year. They went 18 years with no competition. 18 years. They sold 12 million of those suckers. It saved Chrysler. But they had no competition for 18 years. No competition. And it all started because they got the timing right. The company was ready. They had the front-wheel drive. They had Lee Iacocca in place. The market was ready. The minivan is so much better than a station wagon. And actually, you don't need consumer research to tell you that. Duh. And the technology was ready. Third, you need to create barriers to competitors. And that's how you develop legs. You develop barriers to competitors. And that's really important in winning in the brand relevance competition world. And how do you do that? Well, one way is just to execute over the top. If you can execute so much better than anybody else, that really raises the bar. And somebody will say, well, we have to come in not just by, putting up a website and having a big inventory of shoes. We've got to match Zappos. And they got this 24/7 concept of customer service. They don't advertise. They put all their money into 24/7. You can call up Zappos and they'll famously, get you a pizza at 2 in the morning if you want. And they'll take any shoe you buy, they'll bring it back. 10 months later, they'll take it back. So you're not risking anything by buying a shoes by mail order. So execution makes a tough bar. The second thing is to continuously innovate. I mean, that's what Chrysler did with their minivan. They had the swivel seats, they had the sliding door on the driver's side. Every other year, they were doing some major innovations to make it a moving target. And you look at the iPod, they have the Nano, the Shuffle, the Touch, and the iPad. It's a moving target. So Apple is not just staying still. And to go beyond functional benefits. I have been, for just over 10 years, involved in in evaluating the brands in Japan. We, every year, do a survey monitoring the brand equity of 1,000 brands in Japan. And in fact, a couple years ago at my Haas lecture, I give an annual lecture at Haas in the winter, and I talked about learnings from 10 years of data. But one of the interesting facts is one of the top 10 brands every year, sometimes the top 5, is Panasonic. And one reason Panasonic is so well regarded in Japan is because they have such a strong reputation for social concern that they really create, for some people, a must-have in terms of brands and companies they want to have a relationship with. So they have kind of like GE, they've got all kinds of green businesses. They've got eco solutions, solar cells, energy management. They can manage the energy use in your home or your building or your office all automatically. And they've done some incredible work in that. They've made all these appliances that are energy efficient. And incidentally, Panasonic used to have 2 brands, Panasonic and National, but now they just have one, Panasonic. National was their appliance brand. And they have a big building in the Ginza in which you can go in and you can see examples of all these energy-saving appliances and how the eco-energy-saving systems work. But they even went beyond that. They actually have what they call green life innovations. So they really encourage the whole population of Japan to be energy sensitive, to save energy. So they're really trying to change the values and lifestyle of everybody in Japan. So, most people that have social programs of one kind or another get no credit for it, and very few stand out. But the ones that do really can make a difference. Just a case in point is Walmart. Walmart's become a company that's harder to hate than it used to be because of their sustainability program that has made a difference. So the point is to augment the definition of the new subcategory with something beyond functional benefits. And that will create more of a barrier. Branded differentiators. This is another concept that I introduced first in my brand portfolio strategy book that I think is really powerful. And it comes to innovation. Actually, I wrote an article for California Management Review on branding your innovation. Because if you don't brand it, it's harder to communicate, it's harder to remember, it's harder to understand, and it's harder to own. But if you brand it, you can own it. A colleague of mine at Haas, Rashi Glazer, did an amazing study some time ago in which he showed people some products. And for half the people, he pointed out that this has Alpine class fill. And the other half he didn't. And he did the same thing with pasta and with another product. Pasta had mayonnaise, authentic mayonnaise in it. And he did another thing with a consumer electronics thing. So, but what he found was that if you had a branded something in it, even though he had no idea what this is, that they would justify paying more. They could see themselves paying more for it if it had this branded whatever. You know, Intel inside, for a decade and a half at least, got 10% premium for any computer that had Intel inside, and nobody had a clue what Intel inside meant. Not a clue. But they would pay 10% more for it. So Weston, in 1999, introduced the Heavenly Bed. Heavenly Bed is a better bed. How many own a Heavenly Bed? I do. I'm the only one. Oh, one more. Yeah, you and I. It's incredible, isn't it? I mean, how can you imagine going out of a hotel and say, I really like that bed, can I buy one? Just 5 years after they introduced it, they started selling it. They sold nearly 4,000 the first year. It's now in Nordstrom's. But it's a better bed. I mean, it's just flat better. And better springs, better thing, more pillows, better quilt, and it's a better bed. No, it is, right? It's a better bed. No, it's not Intel inside. This is an innovation that you can actually tell the difference. How many have slept in one? No, it's a better bed, right? It changed the whole hotel industry. I mean, the whole hotel industry had been existing for hundreds of years just to provide people a place to sleep, and nobody figured out the bed's probably important. Until Weston came out with the Heavenly Bed. It completely, I mean, every other hotel chain in the world was frantic. They'd have all these task force to try to, what can we do to the Heavenly Bed? And they did this, and they did that, and they did the other thing, but at the end of the day, there's still only one Heavenly Bed, and it's at Weston. And when Weston put this thing in their hotels, everything went up. The satisfaction went up. The perception of decor went up. The occupancy went up. Because there's a lot of people that, well, this is a must-have. They won't go someplace that doesn't have a premium bed. And so all these people, in fact, for 5 years, there was no competition. And then all these other chains started coming in. But can you imagine being at Hilton and being a member of the task force trying to do something about the Heavenly Bed, and somebody walks in the room and said, you're not going to believe this, they now got the Heavenly Shower. It can be a technology, like the hybrid synergy drive at Toyota. And the fact they branded that gives them a way, again, the same thing a brand does. It has a way to communicate, helps you remember, gives it credibility because you're spending money branding it, must be worth something. And it allows you, most important of all, to own it. Because nobody else can come out with the hybrid synergy drive. You can have programs like the Harley-Davidson Photo Center, Harley-Davidson Ride Planner. I mean, other motorcycle companies can come out with something similar, but there's going to be only one Harley-Davidson Ride Planner. OnStar has been a terrific branded differentiator for General Motors. And General Motors, for a long time, they had Mr. Goodwrench and OnStar. And those are the only two things that General Motors really brings to the table. But this provides a branded differentiator for General Motors cars. So again, you have a similar problem, as I mentioned before, because there's this tendency, every time you have an incremental innovation, to brand it. So this, my work, the branded differentiator concept, is kind of an excuse to slap a brand on your favorite whatever you're working on. And so the result is often, proliferation of brands and confusion and lack of clarity and lack of priorities, and it's a mess. So we have to come in and do a total brand portfolio strategy job to get it straight. So you really have to realize that you can only support a few brands. And you got to understand the difference between a descriptor and a brand. You know, back when Compact existed, they had a brand called Presario. They put a ton of money behind Presario. And they did some research, and they found that Presario wasn't a brand. Nobody bought Presario. They bought Dell. No, they bought Compact, I mean. They bought Compact. They didn't buy Dell. They bought Compact. And actually, even LaserJet is not much of a brand. People buy HP. So you really have to understand, again, it comes down, can we deliver? Is there a must-have? Is the heavenly bed represent a must-have for that decision? Is the business worthwhile? Is it going to be a must-have for enough people? And does it have legs? Or is it just going to be a short-term thing? Finally, you need to become a category or subcategory exemplar. See, in brand reference or preference or relevance competition, there's a different challenge. It's now no longer just building a brand and doing the brand strategy stuff, which we're kind of comfortable with and used to. You have to manage the perceptions of the new category or subcategory. I mean, that's a fundamentally new task. And it goes against the nature. It's hard to justify putting money behind it. It's hard to know how to do it. But the best way to do it is to become an exemplar. An exemplar is a brand that represents the category or subcategory. It defines it, and it connects your company to that category. So that when it comes to the second stage of that decision model, your brand is considered. If you're an exemplar brand, you're going to be considered. And you're going to probably push out other brands out of a person's mind at the same time. So how do you become an exemplar? Well, the fundamental rule is you have to market the category and the subcategory and not the brand. I was just studying iShares and how in 2000, after a similar concept had been kicking around, they decided that, Barclays decided that iShares, nobody really knew about it, and this was a good thing because it had a lot of attributes that mutual funds didn't have. So they decided to start building the category, and they became the exemplar. And even today, they're the dominant company in that area. Salesforce.com was one of the first applications to really buy into cloud computing. So they spent all their time talking about cloud computing, how it is reliable, how it does save money in terms of upgrading and training and installing and so on, and how it is fast. And so they would attack the negatives and accentuate the positive, but always talking about the subcategory, the cloud computing. And they do these incredible things like they'd go to their largest competitors having a huge meeting, and they'd go outside and picket it with signs that would say, you know, no software, which by that they meant the old-fashioned software. And they'd hire people to pretend to be reporters to record this. And it just went on. And it was always about the category or subcategory. Second, you have to be the early market leader. You don't have to be first. Honda was not first with hybrids in the U.S. Toyota wasn't first with the Prius. It was Honda. Honda was there 2 years before Prius. As I already told you, Apple was not the first anytime. But they're the ones that got it right, and they became the early market leader. And you have to be the authentic choice. And that's what happened to Asahi Superdry when it came in 1986. It became the authentic brand. And Kirin Dry, which came out less than a year later, everybody realized, I mean, Kirin is a lager. And Kieran's been telling us for 20 years that lager beer is the best. That's where real beer drinkers drink. And then suddenly they're going to be a super dry beer. And it was just a transparent effort to try to squish this new rival that emerged. So here's some examples of exemplar vans. Look at CNN and ESPN. Both had the world to themselves for a decade and a half in each case. IKEA, Tide, and Tide Cold Water. And Tide's now come out with a new product that's going to create a whole new subcategory, they hope. I like Jerry Garcia's quote. He said, "You do not merely want to be considered the best of the best. You want to be considered the only one who does what you do." So that's the essence of brand relevance competition. The goal is to be the only one, not to be better than others, not to win the brand preference competition, but to be the only one. So again, these observations, ideas come from all over. It's not just doing customer research, but you can get ideas from all kinds of things, and there's some certain patterns that work a lot, like look at the underserved segment, like package things together into systems that appear again and again. You need to worry about timing. You don't want to be too late, but you don't want to be too early either. And you have to have the company on board. You have to be able to deliver. And it's not enough to have a vision. You need to create barriers to competitors. Do that by execution, doing it by ongoing innovation, doing it by augmenting the definition of the category so that what they're buying is not just functional benefits. Branded differentiators like the Heavenly Bed. So if you have substantial innovation or transformational innovation, if you can, brand it, because that's really the way to own it. And so let me just spend a second or two talking about the other side of the coin, and that is relevance is a huge opportunity, but it's also a threat. Because if you're engaged in a company where there's market dynamics, relevance can be a threat. And there's two kinds of threats, really. One is that you're no longer making what customers are buying. You can have the best SUV in the world. People can love it. They'll recommend it to others. They'll use social media to talk about it. They just love it. But if they're now, instead of buying an SUV, going to buy a hybrid sedan, it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much they love your SUV brand. It doesn't matter. Because you're not relevant anymore. So you need to get relevance. One way is to try to get parity on these must-haves. So McDonald's is losing a lot of business to Starbucks, especially in the mornings. So they came out with McCoffee, not designed to be better than Starbucks, but designed to be almost as good enough so that that's not a reason why you don't go to McDonald's. You can reposition like LL Bean did from a hunting fishing company to an outdoors company to be relevant to today's consumer. You can leapfrog, as Cisco does when it buys companies and then combines them with the Cisco synergy to provide something even better. And then there's another kind of relevance threat. You can lose energy and visibility. We know that the lack of energy is one of the problems that almost all brands throughout the world now face. And we have data that's showing the decline of brands throughout the world. And the exceptions to this decline are brands with energy. So almost every brand has to worry about energy. So you can create energy by product vitality, like Dove did. They went from a $200 million brand in 1990 to a $4 billion brand today with a lot of product vitality, taking the brand into other categories. You can have customer connection programs like Dell has done with IdeaStorm, Studio Dell, Director Dell, and Dell Community. And that's a way to provide energy. You can find something with energy or create something in energy and connect your brand to it. Like Avon has done with the Avon Walk for Breast Cancer. It creates enormous energy for a brand that's really kind of boring in a set of products. It's hard to get excited about lipstick. I'm probably not in the target market, but... So anyway, that's kind of the brand relevance story. And again, I come back to the assertion that we're spending way too much time on brand preference. And we need to spend more time on brand relevance competition. And that means we need to, at the margin, divert our budgets from incremental innovation to more substantial innovation and transformational innovation. And we need to develop organizations that are capable of not so much detecting ideas, because that's usually not the problem. It's evaluating the ideas, selecting the ones that really will create new categories or subcategories, and then implementing them, introducing them into the marketplace, and continually to support them so that they have sustainable barriers to competitors. Okay, so let's see if we have a few questions.
We're watching the emergence of a new subcategory in automobiles with all-electric cars. Could you comment on the early efforts of what Nissan's doing with the Leaf and contrast that with what Chevy is doing with the Volt?
Yeah, I don't... I'm closer to Japanese brands because I spent so much time in Japan. But I think that the Nissan is doing a really good job with the Leaf. I think that they've, first of all, staked out really a pure subcategory that's distinct from Volt, in that Volt is sort of it's not really an electric car because it's got this engine also. And so I guess the real answer, I don't know. I don't know a lot about either of them, but what I have seen, I'm really impressed with the Leafs thing. Does anybody else have an opinion on that? Leaf versus Volt? Yeah.
There's a negative, not so much a brand, but negative association with electric vehicles, such that an all-electric vehicle has shown repeated failures throughout history, whereas what Volt is doing is it's a plug-in, it can still run, so it takes away the range anxiety that could be the biggest impediment, because with an all-electric, everybody knows that there's not yet an established infrastructure. So with the Volt, you kind of get away from that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Not that I like either, but that's just my perception.
Yeah. Is there any other comments? Well, I think that there's no question that the challenge for Chevrolet and for Nissan is going to be around the subcategory definition and the way they link to that definition. And so if you look at their efforts in that light, I think it's really an interesting case study going forward. Yeah.
I have a question. So, you give a lot of examples, really looking back, because you see a lot of good survivals of this very tough brand competition in different industries, right? But let's just take a little different angle. If you're an entrepreneur or something looking forward, you don't know the future holds, right? How would you make such difficult choice to start a new category, even though you have no idea? So what do you believe is eccentric, or something that you truly believe, something defines what you see the vision, or something external factor you think that drives entrepreneur to make that kind of decision?
Yeah, good point. And again, marketing research is of limited usefulness because customers are not really capable of judging something that's soon enough. Henry Ford famously said, if you asked a customer, they'd say that they want a faster horse. Because they just don't have the concept. But what I would say, in some of the studies I've done, is that you really can't screw up any dimension. Like I did in the book, I talk about Segway. And Segway did a lot of things right. They had this great technology that was patented. They had incredible production. There was no real reports of products that didn't work. They all worked. And they had probably the most mind-blowing marketing and PR introduction of any product ever. I mean, they were on the cover of Time magazine. There was cartoons of Osama bin Laden using a Segway going across Afghanistan. I mean, it was everywhere. It was on late-night shows, early morning shows. So they did those three things really, really well. But they did a couple things not so well, and that was their problem. One was distribution. The Segway really required some time to learn how to use. So what they needed to have somebody that could link to them, like a motorcycle dealer, or maybe a Home Depot, a Sears, but they sold it through Amazon. And because they thought the big market was going to be postal workers and security officers, the people that went around the malls. And it turned out that wasn't such a big market. So they misjudged the market. They didn't have good distribution. And one reason was they didn't have marketing talent. I mean, I give them a break. I mean, they have great technology, great production. That's 2 out of 3. And great communications. That's 3 out of 4, really. But they just didn't have good marketing, especially distribution. So, and I studied the Saturn when it came out in the early 90s. One of the great success stories of our time. And one of the great strategic blunders of our time when General Motors didn't capitalize on it. But they did about 7 things right, and they did them all right, and they did them all really well. They didn't miss on any. And that's what it takes. So you have to look yourself in the mirror and say, can we really deliver this? Can we do all the key success factors? And not just 5 out of 7? And do we have the commitment to spend the money and to get the people so we can do that? But it's a good question, and it's a tough one. And if it was, if it wasn't so tough, we would have a lot more people spending less money on brand preference competition.
Can I just follow up on that? So do you believe there's a nebulous definition of a luck?
There's what?
A nebulous definition of a luck. Do you think that's actually a quantifiable business driver, or what do you think that is?
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't know what percentage luck plays in the big successes of our time, but it's damn significant. And, you look at the performance of CEOs and the ones that are really extraordinary, and boy, they had a lot of luck. They had the wind to their back or something. And it has, I think it's a big role to play. There's a lot of uncertainty in any decision. So the way you deal with that usually is the successful ones deal it by making, letting the strategy evolve and finding out what works and then go in that direction, and you get a blow. In almost all great strategies were not conceived as such early on. They almost all evolved. So that's one thing to do. The other thing is just to have good people. Boy, people make a huge difference. If you have, especially somebody at the top. I mean, the Saturn guy that was running Saturn was one of the most brilliant, charismatic executives we had, very soft-spoken. He wasn't bombastic, but he was. And most successes are associated with somebody that's really good at the top.
While, right here in the middle.
Yeah.
While some of the companies you've referenced today have service elements, most of them, or all of them, I think, are product companies. Do you have any comments about how this is, if in any way, different for companies that are pure service businesses?
Well, I think in general, branding for service companies are different in that almost always the organization is important. And where it's really hard to differentiate a product because it's usually based on functional benefits, it's much easier to differentiate an organization because that's people, values, programs, heritage, and those are usually pretty unique. So that's one thing. In a service company, we have to dial up these properties of the organization. And you look at Nordstrom's, you look at Zappos. I mean, Zappos is all based on these 10 values, one of which is have fun and be weird. And you can't do that in a product organization. You look at Virgin, you look at Singapore Airlines. I mean, airlines is one of the product categories. Most people say everything's the same. I mean, Delta, American, they're all the same, right? But at the same time, there are 4 brands that are very distinct in that industry. There's Virgin, there's Southwest, there's Singapore, and what else? Anyway, there's 3 at least. And and they all are characteristics of the organization and the heritage and the values. So that's one thing. Also, in the service industry, you have more degrees of freedom, usually. And, like take a retailer like IKEA or Muji or Tokyo Hands or Zara or H&M. You just have more degrees of freedom. So you can create a subcategory that's defined in a multidimensional way that's harder to copy. That's another thing. But in financial services, I mentioned iShares is a great example of a new category. Schwab has done it 3 or 4 or 5 times. Schwab is really a great example. They started out with discount brokerage. They started out with one source. They were pioneering in internet banking, and so they've done a lot of things to create new subcategories, and I think that's one reason. And they've generally branded it or labeled it pretty well. I mean, OneSource was a great innovation.
Hi, I have a question about how to respond when a competitor has created a new subcategory in the space in which you compete. Mm-hmm. So I work at Clorox. You mentioned Tide a moment ago. The technology that... Yeah, so I'm in trouble. So Tide, you mentioned a moment ago that Tide is coming out with a new innovation. They're creating a subcategory that's unit dose. They actually introduced that initially in the category in which I compete, which is in stain removers. And so my question is, I was particularly intrigued by the Kirin Asahi example, and particularly Kirin, and its inability to figure out how best to respond to a competitor that created a subcategory. In their case, they tried to replicate that subcategory, and that didn't really do it. So we're trying to answer questions right now about do we mimic? Do we seek to be superior? Like how best to respond? I'd love to get your take on that.
I think you need a higher profit. It's a tough question, and it's a strategic question. But I mentioned that one of the things to do is to gain parity, and so if you can position them as a functional benefit defined category and nothing more, then it's a matter of getting parity within that functional benefit, whether it be, I don't know what it'd be, cleaning clothes or the size of the soap or whatever. I mean the cubic size of it. So if you can position the functional benefit, then you can duplicate that or gain enough parity so that then people aren't going to be loyal to it. That's one thing. And if you can leapfrog it, of course, that's even better. The other thing is, another technique is just to fight the subcategory. So fine, you have a new subcategory. It's not as good as the old subcategory. We think, because of these reasons. So In-N-Out Burger has, there's this trend. I don't know if it's reached everybody in here toward healthy eating. And it's sort of against everything In-N-Out stands for. So do you think In-N-Out Burger has added salads and made its meat less fatty and cooked with less grease? No. They're still making these greasy hamburgers and French fries and malts, and that's it. But they do it so well. And their argument is that, okay, there's some people that just want this stuff, and there's other people that would really like this once every 5 weeks or something. They say, the hell with it, today I'm going to do that, right? And so they're true to their subcategory, and they're just they're actually doing okay. So they're bucking the trend. See, one of the problems is that if I did one of my most remarkable articles I wrote was with a friend of mine named George Day. It was remarkable because we wrote it in 2 hours. In most articles in academic journals, it takes months and years to write. We did this in 2 hours. And we just sat down and said, okay, everybody wants to go into growth markets, right? What's the downside of a growth market? And we thought about that, and we put in a litany of things. And one at the top was the fact that growth markets attract everybody else. And so one of the problems with trying to respond to the healthy eating crate is everybody else is doing it too. And therefore it gets crowded, and it's the opposite of Econ 101. You're suddenly competing in an area with everything. So In-N-Out Burger says, we're not going to be the 500th fast food chain that's going to be healthy. We're going to be the indulgent one. And so anyway, that's another option.
Why don't we take one more question?
Hi, over here on your right. I think one of the market dynamics that we're seeing in the high-tech industry is that the consumer market is driving innovation. So if you think about Apple, Google, and even Facebook, the enterprise organizations are actually copying what's going on in the consumer market. And you mentioned Cisco. Cisco has a strong brand, but doesn't have a lot of credibility in the consumer market. And I think, the Flip camera is a good example where, they acquired Flip and now, they spent $500 million on it, and now it's just going away. So what does a Cisco with a very strong brand in the enterprise market do to stay innovative, right, where the consumers are driving a lot of that innovation? What do they need to do before they become irrelevant?
Yeah, that's a great question. The more general question is, what do you do with a brand that has to be relevant in more than one market? In some of these markets are even inconsistent. Like Wells Fargo has to sell to consumers and has to sell to business people. And the business people at Wells Fargo says, get rid of the goddamn stagecoach. And it's Hewlett Packard's another one. They want to be relevant in the consumer space, but they have an enterprise brand. So how do they be the least bit fun and unboring to these consumer people with this terrible HP logo and so on that's so tied to enterprise? So it gets into the whole general area of brand portfolio strategy, and In brand strategy, I can tell you how to build a brand. You have to do these 8 or 10 steps. You kind of do one after another, and you'll get to a brand vision, and you implement that vision. I can tell you how to do that. But brand portfolio strategy is very complicated, very idiosyncratic, very related to business strategy, which is often ill-defined. And so, and that's the case at Cisco. I mean, if you tell me what your business strategy is from 3 to 5 years, then I can be more likely to develop a good brand strategy. So portfolio strategy is tough. And there are no easier answers to that question or others like it. Well, anyway, thanks for having me. Yeah.
David.
Thanks. I was last in here, and Janet Yellen was speaking, and she got this enormous response. And I told her that she's probably planning audience members, so I'll have to tell her that I got applause too. But anyway, thanks for your support for Haws. It's a really great place. And if you want to have this Q&A thing continue, you can look at my blog, davidaaker.com, where I comment once a week on branding issues of one kind or another.
Again, can we thank David?
Enjoy the rest of the day.
David, we have a little gift for you.
Thank you. Oh, thanks.